let you in on a poorly guarded secret. Christmas was never actually Jesus' birthday. No. Rather, it was the celebration planned by the early church to celebrate the incarnation of the Son of God. We don't know what day Jesus was born on. I mean, I guess there's a 1 in 365 chance that it was, the 25th of December, but it's not likely based on some of the suggestions of season in the Gospels. But it is a celebration of the incarnation and birth of God the Son in the person of Jesus. And to understand his incarnation, there's something about the background that we have to understand, something about the Old Testament God and promises that he had made that drove him ultimately to fulfill those promises through the incarnation of the Son of God. Do you know what the first words of the New Testament are? Everybody knows the first words of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. In the beginning, God. You know that because the man on the moon said so. But what about the New Testament? A record, we read, of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of what? David. At the birth of Jesus, the angels declared to the shepherds, "This day is born to you in the city of David, a Savior who is Christ the Lord." You can't understand Jesus. You cannot understand the incarnation without understanding David, whose son he was, David, whose father he was, David, in whose city he was born, David, his ancestor, David, in whose kingship he continues. And particularly the prophecy that we're going to read from 2 Samuel 7 about David. To understand the incarnation, we first must know the God of David who became incarnate in Jesus. Now, the context of the passage in 2 Samuel we're going to look at is that Israel has been through centuries of tumult, through the era of the judges, through corrupt King Saul's reign and his attempt to destroy David, and various betrayals. And finally, David has been on his throne. He is secure on his throne. The nation is prospering. The people are at peace, relatively speaking, because David was always at war. But he was always triumphant at war. And so things were going well. David's throne is secure. He's just finished constructing a huge palace for himself, with the interior covered with ornate carved cedar woodwork everywhere. It's beautiful. And David has just offered God a deal. God, I'm going to build you a house just like my own. And the prophet Nathan is there, and he seems to encourage it, thinks that's a pretty good idea. God could probably use a house. But then something happens that night that changes everything and sets us up to see Jesus. This is 2 Samuel chapter 7. We're going to read verses 4 through 6, then pick it up in verse 10, and then again in verse 25. This is the word of our God. That night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I've been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. And I will provide a place for my people Israel," in verse 10, "and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore, as they did at the beginning and have done ever since that time. I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also give you rest from all your enemies. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you. Who will come from your own body, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father. He will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with the rod of men, with floggings inflicted by men. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. Nathan reported to David all the words of this entire revelation. And then King David went in and sat before the Lord, and he said, "Who am I, O sovereign Lord? And what is my family that you have brought me this far? And as if this were not enough in your sight, O sovereign Lord, you have also spoken about the future of the house of your servant. Is this your usual way of dealing with man, O sovereign Lord? And now, Lord God, keep forever the promise you have made concerning your servant and his house. Do as you promised, so that your name will be great forever. Then men will say, 'The Lord Almighty is God over Israel,' and the house of your servant David will be established before you. O Lord Almighty, God of Israel, you have revealed this to your servant, saying, 'I will build a house for you.' So your servant has found courage to offer you this prayer." So David offered to build God a house. God puts that process on hold and says, "Actually, you're not going to do it. Your kid's going to do it." And instead, God offers to build a house for David. A house, not in the physical sense, but a royal house to rule forever. What do we see here? First, we see a God that is unlike any other God. This is a God who uniquely demands absolute loyalty, faithfulness, obedience, and trust to him as to a king. It might surprise you to realize that most gods throughout history have requested nothing of the sort. They haven't demanded absolute loyalty. They haven't thought they were the only God. They never thought that they were the creator that everybody owed their life to. What most gods throughout history demanded was sacrifice and offerings. It was a contractual relationship, if you will, in which, gods demanded offerings in exchange for certain blessings. And so you would seek out a God in whose sphere of influence you needed assistance. Relationships with gods in the ancient world were highly transactional. If you were going to go on a journey across the sea, the natural thing for you to do would be to go to the temple or the shrine or the hilltop of the sea god and offer sacrifice to the sea god in exchange. It was a purchase. It was like going to McDonald's or Schnucks or Walmart. You went to the god of the sea to get blessings from the god of the sea. You gave him the stuff he wanted, and you trusted him to give you the safe travel that you wanted. It was contractual. It was transactional. These weren't love relationships. The god of the sea wasn't demanding, your obeisance throughout life. He just wanted sacrifices, and he would give you safe journey, or he wouldn't, as the case often was. But, and there were gods for everything, and transactional relationships with all of these gods. If you needed fertility, you'd go to the god of fertility. And many an Israelite did this. It's what the prophets railed against throughout Old Testament history. They would go to the fertility god and offer to the fertility god. And the fertility god would give them children, they would hope. People used gods to get things just like gods used people to get things. There were different gods for different things, but nobody loved the gods. They weren't typically objects of affection. They were very human in their pride and sin and selfishness and issues. Nobody looked at them with admiration or affection or love. And this is still the case in much of human religion. I remember reading an interview with some Carnatic priests in the southwest of India. They worked at a temple there, and the interviewee asked them certain questions. It was years ago. I don't remember all the details. But he asked them, "So do you love the God that you serve?" And their eyes kind of became big and they looked confused. What an awkward, dumb question to ask. Well, do you want to have a closer relationship with your God? Of course not. Why would I want that? This thing is terrifying. We're paying him off. We don't want to have a snuggly relationship with this God. Are you crazy? Gods are things that you use to get things by giving them what they want, and it's transactional in nature. It's not love relationship, and the gods were not demanding obedience, faith, trust, that you serve them with all your life. That's just not how it worked. There's something very unique about the God of the Bible in that he seems to think he's the only one and that we owe him everything. Our very life, our very breath, our wealth, our treasure, everything, because he was the one for whom we were made to be in relationship with him. And so there's something very weird and unique about the God of the Bible that is not at all true about the gods of human religion. But there's something else that's incredibly unique about the God of the Bible, and it's this. The God of the Bible reverses the reward cycle of ancient religions. In ancient religions, you would give the gods something and they would reward you with something. It was transactional. I give you, you give me. Other religions, you would expect to read a God saying, if you build me a temple, I will secure your throne. But here that's reversed. God says, I secure your throne, and you're not even going to be the one to build me a temple. That's going to come to your son. It's grace first, blessing first. I will secure your throne. Then maybe we can talk about you building me a house. But your love for me, your commitment to me flows out of my love for you because I have claimed you and free you to be in relationship with me, a relationship of love. The Bible categorically rejects any notion that the true God would tolerate any kind of transactional relationship. I mean, what do you call it? When a man goes out at night and pays someone to love him. It's a very old profession. Happens every day. And in fact, the Bible describes the worship of other gods using just that language when God says to his people, you are prostituting yourself with other gods. Because that's the nature of those relationships. They were transactional. They weren't covenanted relationships. They weren't about being close and having intimacy and love between you and a God. God does not want transactional relationships. If you think you can pay him off, you are not dealing with the true God who is glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, working wonders, and will not be toyed with. You either seek him or you don't. You either know him or you don't. But God does not accept a transactional relationship. And it's possible that that's what David was tempted to think. We can't be sure, but Eugene Peterson talks about this possibility, which I think he might be right. He says, I think David was just about to cross over a line from being full of God to being full of himself. David was riding the crest of fame, having decisively defeated the opposition. He united God's people. He had captured the allegiance of all the people of Israel. He was heading towards success, and he'd begun to think that he could do God a favor by building him a house. Peterson writes, but if David continues to develop along those lines, he'll be ruined as a representative of God's kingdom. If any one of us develops an identity in which God and God's grace is less important to who we are than our own action and our own importance, our ability to represent God's kingdom is utterly ruined. See, success can be a very dangerous drive. I know of lots of pastors who have fallen into ruin because they needed to be successful in their ministries, and they were willing to cross a few lines in order to be successful. And God brought them low to humble them and to free his church from them because they were dangerous to themselves and to the kingdom. Many a Christian through the centuries has fallen into sin because they wanted to be powerful, or worse, they were given power and it destroyed them. God doesn't want your success. He wants your faithfulness. He wants your trust. He wants your obedience to his commands. And when you fall down flat on your face, as you will because we are still sinners, he wants you to step back up and let him brush you off and clean you and help you serve him. He doesn't want your success. He wants your faithfulness. And not in order to gain us leverage. He gives us grace. He gives us forgiveness. He gives us blessing first. And he does it freely with that grace that then leads us to want to sacrifice for him. See, God is here reversing the reward cycle of human religion. W.A. Wiersholthoeft, a 20th century Dutch theologian, wrote this. He said, "We must make sure that we do not decide that we shall succeed. If we decide to succeed, then we may succeed without succeeding in God's way. But if we go on from day to day seeking to do God's will, not success, but to do his will, then we shall be prepared to receive success from him if he wills it. And if he does not, then we'll be prepared humbly to say, it is God's decision that David shall not build the temple, but he will instead raise up Solomon to do that." By reversing the reward cycle of human religion, the God of the Bible frees us up to focus on being faithful to God. Faithful not to get him to bless us, but faithful because he has blessed us. To have a real relationship with him, not just as a theological possibility, but as a lived life of service to God and to humanity. That's the only way to reach the human heart, is through God's grace. We love him because he loved us first. And that's always the way it works. If you were to, decide that for the next month, your spouse or significant other, that for the next month you would simply command your significant other, your spouse, your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, to love you. Honey, I command that you love me. I demand you to love me. You're required to love me. Don't you know the Bible commands you to love me? What's that going to do to their heart? It will grow so cold towards you that they will dread being in your presence, and with good reason. Because love me does not elicit a love response. I love you solicits a love response. It's why we emphasize the grace of God. It's why the grace of God is central to the Christian faith. Why we always point to the cross on which our God bled and died for us. Because the only way to make you willing to sacrifice and obey the Lord is if you understand and are deeply captivated by the immensity of his love, self-sacrificial love and compassion for you. As that realization grows in your heart, he will free you to trust him and to be faithful to him. This reverses the reward cycle of human religion, and it's incredibly unique in the history of religion. And yet we see something else here that's very unique to Christianity and to the God of the Bible, because here we see a God who has an incarnational heart. To become incarnate is to take on our experience, our life, our nature, our flesh, our blood, to walk in our shoes, to walk a mile in our moccasins, so to speak, to draw near to us and to refuse to leave us because he insists on being with us no matter what you're going through, no matter what suffering, no matter what hardship, no matter what shame, no matter what loss. He is right there with you as an incarnational God. We see it right here, how he stresses that God is saying, I am a God who lives with my people. And when they wandered in the desert, I wasn't up in some palace in heaven. I was right there wandering in the desert with them. It's the incarnational heart of God. He says, I have been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. I will provide a place for my people Israel and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own. God is here saying, I know it's been a rough journey to get here, but things are going to stabilize, and I am going to provide a home of their own for each and every one of my people, and I am not going to live like a king in a palace while they're still in tents struggling to get by. God is saying, I will remain in my tent until everyone else has moved out of their tent into a home of their own. Then a king can build me a house or a temple, but not one day before then. Wherever my people are, there I will be. And if they are living in poverty, I will live with them in poverty. If they are in a tent, I will live with them in a tent. And I do not move out of my tent until every single one of my people has a house of his or her own. When they are living in abundance, then your son can build a house for me, not one day before. These were the most ungodlike words of any God in human history. 1,000 years before Jesus was born, this is a God who reveals an incarnational heart, a God who wanted to live among his people, whatever that meant. No matter how much suffering was entailed, or shame or humiliation, he would live in a tent while they lived in tents. A God who refused to have a house until everybody else had their house secure. A God like no other. He demands our allegiance like no other God. He reverses the reward cycle of human religion like no other God. And he makes it all about his grace. And here we see an incarnational heart that we see in no man-made God. So how can God be like that? Well, we deserve a lot worse, because the greatest commandment, Jesus said, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And he got that from the Old Testament. And that means, if that's the greatest commandment, then every day that I love God with less than all of my heart, every day that I give him only 90% of my strength, I am actually committing the greatest sin in violation of the greatest commandment, which means that I have been committing the greatest sin against the greatest commandment 24/7 for 53 years and counting, because I have not obeyed God with all of my heart, with 16/16 of my strength for 10 seconds my entire life, and neither of you, which means that we're all the worst of sinners with the Apostle Paul, because we're all continually violating the greatest commandment. And yet God nevertheless blesses us, despite the fact that we deserve his judgment. I mean, look at what God is promising here. He's promising a kingdom that cannot be defeated by sin. He says, I will be Solomon's father, and he'll be my son, and when Solomon does wrong, I'm going to punish him with the rod of men and floggings inflicted by men. But my love will never be taken away from him. This is a kingdom that cannot be taken away by sin. This is a kingdom that cannot be defeated by death. God says, when your days are over and you rest with your fathers, I'll raise up your offspring, and then I'll establish his kingdom forever. Even death cannot defeat this kingdom. Sin cannot defeat this kingdom, and it cannot be limited by time. He says, I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. And Jesus comes as the Son of David, the fullness of the Davidic lineage, the fullness of the house of David, the Davidic king in whom all these promises come to fullness, to bring us this fullness of a kingdom that cannot be defeated by sin, that cannot be defeated because Christ has died on the cross, and the power of sin has been taken away. He's defeated its guilt. He's paid its debt. He's incurred the debt incurred by our sin, he has now paid in full. And it's a kingdom that cannot be defeated by death either. By rising from death, Jesus showed himself to have power over death itself. As he rose, he showed us that his kingdom will last forever. And it's a kingdom that cannot be limited by time. When Jesus returns, he's going to make everything right, and all things will be made new, and he will rule forever and ever. Now, if Jesus wasn't telling the truth when he made all these claims, then the reality is that what we do in this life does not matter. It's absurd, because 1 trillion years from now, the stars will have gone out. We won't be there to know. You're not going to be at your own funeral. And 1 trillion years from now, there will be no one to know that humanity ever existed, that there ever was an earth. And so no act of kindness, therefore, has any objective eternal meaning, nor does humanity, nor love relationships, nor adventure, or effort, or career, or sacrifice. Nothing at all will amount to anything. No one will know that anything ever existed, and there's no meaning to goodness or beauty. There's no reality to justice versus injustice, goodness versus evil, beauty versus ugliness, truth versus falsehood, because we are nothing if Jesus was not telling the truth. But if Jesus did have truth in his words, when he claimed to be the Son of God and God incarnate, when he said, I am the resurrection and the life, whoever believes in me, though he die, he shall live forever. When Jesus said this, if he was telling the truth, then that changes everything. Everything has infinite meaning. Everything is significant. Everything is before the face of God, and we will live forever. And 1 trillion years from now, we will still be learning to love and grow and explore and serve in a universe and a cosmos of space and time that has been made eternally new and transformed in the likes of which we could not even imagine, because Jesus, the Son of God, will rule eternally over the kingdom, the fruit of whose trees, the Bible says, will bring about the healing of the nations. And the kingdom of Jesus, a kingdom of grace which reverses the reward cycle of human religion, who saves us, who washes us and makes us his own, not because of anything we do for him, but because he loves us and then calls us in response to serve him. In Jesus, we see a king incarnate, a God who dwells with his people, taking our flesh, taking our blood, taking our human nature, becoming a God of empathy who refuses a house of his own until he knows that we have an eternal home ourselves. When Rebecca Pippert was an agnostic, she had a kind of burning question that she wrestled with. She asked, how could a finite, limited human being ever claim to know God? How would they know that they're not being deceived? Because we're finite, we're limited. She writes this, she says, one sunny day, I was stretched out on the lawn, and when I noticed that some ants were busy building a mound, and I began to redirect their steps with twigs and leaves, and they simply bounced off and started a new ant mound, and I thought, this is like being God. I'm redirecting their steps, and they don't even realize it. At one point, 2 ants crawled onto my hands, and I thought, wouldn't it be funny if one ant turned to the other and asked, do you believe in Becky? Do you believe Becky really exists? I imagine the other ant answering, don't be ridiculous. Becky is a myth, a fairy tale. How comical, I thought, the hubris of that ant declaring that I don't exist when I could easily blow it off my hand. But what if the other ant said, oh, I believe that Becky exists? How would they resolve it? How could they know that I'm real? What would I have to do to reveal to them who I am? And suddenly I realized the only way to reveal who I, as Becky, am to the ant in a way that they could understand would be to become an ant myself. I would have to identify totally with their sphere of reality. I sat upright, and I remember thinking, what an amazing thought. The scaling down of the size of me, Becky, to perfectly represent who I am in the form of an ant. I know, I would have had to do some tricks, things that no other ant could do, but then it hit me. I had just solved my problem of how finite creatures could ever discover God. God would have to come from outside and reveal who he is to us in a way that we could see and understand. And that's what God did for you. That is the incarnational heart of a God who is unlike any other God. That is the Son of David, Jesus Christ, God in the flesh. St. Athanasius wrote, the incorporeal and corruptible and immaterial Word of God comes into our realm, although he was not formerly distant, but now he comes, condescending toward us in his love for human beings. So John can write in John chapter 1, verse 14, that the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. I mean, think about flesh. Imagine that, you got a nice bonus at the end of the year, and you stop by Straub's in the Central West End, or maybe Clayton, and you check out the meat counter, and it's all USDA prime steaks, the kind of stuff that only expensive steakhouses have. And even then, you have to ask, and they've got dry-aged steaks. They've got Kobe beef. We're talking Saratoga ribeyes with all their fat removed, wrapped in bacon and twined to form a perfect hockey puck of flesh. Big, ginormous cowboy-cut ribeyes that looks like something Fred Flintstone would load into the back of his car. We're talking about perfectly clean chicken breasts that have been pre-flattened. The French term is paillard for your chicken scallopini. Picture the ground veal, the half-pound Kobe beef burger patties, and the filet mignon wrapped in bacon. That's flesh. That's what you and I are made of. We're made of meat, and God became meat. He became meat for us. sarx, flesh, the eternal God, in the person of Jesus, became meat because his heart was so incarnational that he could not have not done it and fulfill the promise of our salvation. It's the incarnational heart of God becoming incarnate. Think of carne on your Spanish language menu. Beef, meat, flesh. And that change, friends, was permanent. There had been many times that God had appeared to his people through the ages as a burning bush before Moses in Exodus, as a pillar of fire or a cloud of smoke. God had appeared many times to his people. But those were what theologians call theophanies. They were temporary appearances of God. Incarnation is different. Incarnation is permanent. Incarnation is whereby God the Son eternally and permanently unites himself to human nature in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, rises from the dead, ascends into heaven, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God, from which he will return in glory to complete his salvation. God is permanently united to human nature, permanently united to meat, to human flesh, because God has become permanently incarnate for our sake, because he is the Hebrew, eternal, Old Testament God of incarnation. What happened in the womb of the Virgin Mary changed the eternal trajectory of the cosmos. The whole thing now gets pulled up into the life of God, deity, and cosmic flesh joined in the body of Jesus. After returning from a long tour, Bono of U2 returned to Dublin to attend a Christmas Eve service, and at some point in the service, Bono describes how he grasped the truth at the heart of the Christmas story, that in Jesus, God became a human being. With tears streaming down his face, Bono says he realized, and I quote, "The idea that God, if there is a force of love and logic in the universe, that it would seek to explain itself is amazing enough. That it would seek to explain itself by becoming a child born in poverty and straw, a child." I just thought, wow, just the poetry. I saw the genius of picking a particular point in time and deciding to turn on this. Love needs to find a form. Intimacy needs to be whispered. Love has to become an action or something concrete. It would have to happen. There must be an incarnation. Love must be made flesh. And Jesus is that eternal God incarnate. I heard a talk about the British novelist Dorothy Sayers. Sayers was a Christian, close friend of St. Louis-born T.S. Lewis, or T.S. Eliot, and of course C.S. Lewis, among others. Dorothy Sayers wrote a series of detective stories, novels focused on a fictional character by the name of Lord Peter Wimsey. And Sayers' creation, Lord Peter Wimsey, was an aristocrat detective from the 1930s who solved all sorts of crimes. And she wrote a whole series of stories and novels about Lord Peter Wimsey. And then about halfway through the series, her Wimsey detective, something changes because a woman suddenly shows up in these detective stories. Sayers' new character is named Harriet Vane. She's so vain, you probably thought this was about her. Sayers' new character that shows up is Harriet Vane, a female mystery writer and one of the very first women to get through Oxford. Harriet and Peter fall in love. And until that point in the series, Wimsey was an unhappy, broken bachelor until Harriet Vane shows up and her love starts to heal Lord Peter Wimsey's broken soul. And it's interesting, of course, Vane, because Dorothy Sayers, like her fictional creation, was one of the first women to graduate from Oxford University. Like Harriet Vane, Dorothy Sayers was a writer of mystery novels. Dorothy Sayers looked at her character that she had created, Lord Peter Wimsey, and she saw that he needed someone to help him out. So who did she put in that story? A detective novelist, a woman, and one of the first women to go through Oxford. Who was that? She put herself in her own stories. She looked into the world that she had created, and she fell in love with the chief character, Peter Wimsey, and she wrote herself into the story so that she herself could heal him. Friends, that is what God has done for you. Having written your story and our human story before creation, before space and time, from eternity, having written out every last detail of human history and of your story and mine, he then saw us and wrote himself into his own story in order to come in to love us and to heal us. God, with his incarnational heart, looked into the world he created, and he fell in love with you, and then sent himself in the person of Jesus into the story to heal us. Jesus Christ, Son of David, God in the flesh, Davidic King, Emmanuel, God with us.